All right, folks, welcome to the runningrestaurants.com podcast. We're bringing the tips, tools, and techniques you need to make your restaurant more profitable and successful. I'm your host, Jaime Oikle. Got a great episode for you with Angelo Esposito, CEO of Wisk.ai. And listen up, anything with AI in it right now is hot. So, Angelo, what do you guys got going on over there?
Yeah, great question. First of all, Jamie, thanks for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here, and I love what you're doing at running restaurants. So thank you for that. Um, at a high level, really, Wisk.ai, food and beverage intelligence platform, or some people like to call it management system, but essentially it's everything COGS related. So the way I like to just break it down is, you know better than anyone, being in the restaurant space, but you look at your prime costs, you got your labor costs, you got your cost of goods sold. Wisk basically focuses on everything cost of goods sold, and we can get into it, but think everything that relates to that. So inventory, ordering, invoice management, recipe costs, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, okay. We will get into a number of those categories, but company background, 1 year,
Yeah.
2 years, 10 years, how long
Yeah,
you guys been
yeah.
rolling?
Good question. So we've been around 10 years, 10 years in November. So in this November, so coming up on 10 years in, yeah, in a month, basically. Started in 2014. Truth is, when we started, it was very, very much focused on one specific thing, which was
Mhm.
bar inventory. So
Ah,
really, really
yeah.
hyper focused on just liquor, wine, and beer inventory. And then over the years, as we got paying customers, as you can imagine, they wanted more and more. And so we kind of ended up going more vertically down the beverage side. So then instead of just bar inventory, it was the invoices for the bars and the recipes for the bars and the point of sale integration for the bars, etc. And then, to be honest, it was really like maybe 5 years ago, pretty much like COVID time was the
Mhm.
catalyst when we launched food. So now it's full food and beverage management. But for a long time, we were really focused on beverage first. And we do that really, really well. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, we added the whole food module, which is great. And that means that today, like, we do really well in full service restaurants for that reason.
I think the layperson looks at the bar, the back bar, and sees all those bottles, and one has got an eighth, and one is full, and there's ones in the back, and they go, "Holy cow! How do they do that?" And that's
Yeah.
where you guys sounds like you cut your skin there. Did you do it? Did you do it with any weights or sensors, or like
Yeah.
how
Good
do you do it
question.
now? I mean, because
Yeah.
technology has obviously shifted in 10
Yeah.
years.
It's
You can
always
talk
shifted.
about, yeah.
Yeah. Great question. So the truth is, when we started, it was all, we actually looked into all kinds of different systems that were meeting with like engineers and math professors and being like, is there a way
Yeah.
apart from the weight, or what about this, or visually, if we have the vault, so we went like deep on like all kinds of ways.
Right.
In the end, the kind of simplest, for many reasons, just not, it wasn't only, it's simple for Wisk, was also for the user and more accurate, et cetera, was really just the weight. So then the question was, okay, weighing it makes the most sense, but how do we make weighing less painful so people actually want to weigh, and weighing becomes easier than eyeballing? And that's where we integrated with Bluetooth scales.
Mm,
And we made the Wisk mobile app so you can just point the camera of the phone to the barcode of the bottle, and it would detect the bottle, the image, and we'd already pre-fill it with weights in the back end, empty weights, full weights. And so what that did is, now if someone scanned, I don't know, a bottle of Hendrix, I'm just picking Hendrix because you can't see through it as an example. When you put it on a Bluetooth scale, it would tell you exactly what's left in it down to the ounce. So that's the biggest thing. And then what we ended up seeing is, like, not only is it obviously more accurate, but there's less guessing, which
mhm.
also takes brain power. So you're probably used to the whole, like most people, the 10 thing method. You look at a bottle, you're like, it's about 0.5, it's about 0.3.
Mhm.
The problem with that is twofold. One is someone's 0.6 can be someone's 0.7, so you end up getting these weird variances. And two, it's very hard to see in a Hendrix bottle, in a Class Azul bottle, in a Malibu rum bottle, you name it, but basically
Right.
anything that's opaque, you can't see through it. And then ultimately, what ends up happening is it does require brain power. So even if you're guessing, what you have to realize is you pick up that bottle. It's like, oh, in here, you pick it up, you got to kind of look at it, you got to think, and then you say, okay, it's about 0.5. So it requires time. Whereas with Wisk, you just scan it, so you're not thinking. It detects it, it pulls up the image, so there's no mistakes. Then you just put on the scale, and it tells you what's there. So that process is also kind of like easier on the I guess brain, so to speak.
Next question. Why is there an open bottle of wine right next to your desk?
That's a good question. So sometimes, no, okay, no, really, it's sometimes when I like to demo. I got wine and I got this random mezcal. So I just have two really
Excellent.
random bottles, and
Yeah,
we got one of our Bluetooth scales. Well, not ours. We integrate with a few different Bluetooth scales.
sure.
So whenever a demo is required, I can just
Bam,
easily
pull it
accessed.
up, pull it up.
Yeah.
You know what? And I'm not saying anything nobody doesn't know, but in the bar, there's games with weights and inventories, and stuff goes missing, and bottles go fling, and water goes in
Mm-hmm.
instead of
Mm-hmm.
rum, and this, I mean, instead of vodka.
Yeah.
So, did you encounter a lot of those questions in the beginning?
Yeah.
How can we, not be losing money with stuff walking out the
Yeah.
door? Is that
Great question. The first thing I always tell people is this: there is a tendency as humans to always think about like a utopia, right? So
yeah,
I always bring people back to reality and say, okay, what are you doing now? Because what happens sometimes is people say, but wait, you're only 99.7% accuracy.
nah,
I tried this one bottle and it's this really creamy liqueur and you were off one. And then it's like, okay, wait. Let's take a few steps back. Before, how were you doing this? Okay, you were barely doing it, but you did it once a month. And that once a month, you had someone counting on a piece of paper and guessing it. And then someone tried to type it in Excel, probably made a ton of mistakes. And you were okay with that. Now you're probably getting 99% plus accuracy. You're worried about one or two little things or about whatever. So the first thing is I just bring them back to reality where like all the problems you're worried about were happening tenfold before. So if you're worried about people stealing because they can add water or whatever, there's a lot less chances that they're stealing as much as when there was nothing in place or they were counting on pen and paper. So that's the first thing.
yep,
But the second thing really is I always tell people at the end of the day, as an owner or as an operator, you have to trust your staff, right? We're not here to police them in the sense that you're trusting them with your keys to open, to close, with the cash. You're trusting them with more, worse things than just physical stock. And so our philosophy is this: on the beverage side, people typically do their inventory weekly, and you'll see the trends, you'll see the patterns. You could try to game things here and there, but like quickly things will spin out of control because you'll see like negative variances, or you'll start seeing things. And then the thing with Wisk is when you see something like, oh, there's a lot of losses in a certain product, we actually have a really unique feature in Wisk. We call it the partial inventory. And it allows you to do a subset any day, anytime, in as short of a period as you want. I'll give you one just concrete example. Because we're integrated with the POS, you can literally go in on a Thursday, count one bottle. Let's say you're having problems with a certain brand. Just count that bottle. You don't have to do a full inventory. Just that bottle. You wait, the open one's done. Takes you 2-3 minutes. Cool. At the end of the shift, count that same bottle, and you'll get a variance report and show you exactly how much you're losing of that bottle for that specific shift. So for us, that's the way that you can kind of zoom in. But at a high level, our goal is simple. It's like, let's lower the COGS so they can really put more money in their pocket, period.
Yeah, and we talk about it on our show all the time, and we'll get into the fact that Angelo does a podcast as well. So I'm sure you hit it as well. And it's restaurant businesses not getting easier, margins keep shrinking. So you need to find a penny here, a nickel there, a dime there, and anything can help. I was going to ask the question, but you kind of hinted at it. How often is a typical inventory done? You hinted at weekly. Is that do you find that to be the sweet spot?
Yeah, typically we find on the beverage side weekly, because of the way we optimize it, Wisk has 200,000 bottles in our database, the barcodes, the images, the weight. So the thing is, when people get set up, there is no setup. We tell them and they're always like, but wait, do I have to send you an Excel sheet? No. Just start scanning. You can split up the work. Everyone can count a separate area. Everything's being synced in real time. So that's why most people do it weekly. On the food side, because it's usually more complex and takes a bit longer, people typically do it monthly. So what I agree with those timelines. Like obviously the more frequent, the better, but there's like a tipping point of just like the time it takes to do these things. So I usually say beverage weekly, food monthly. But when you see what your like top losses or like problem areas are, spend that 5 minutes on a random day and do, count just your steaks or count just that tequila bottle. And you can kind of zoom in with that partial inventory feature.
I'm sure, or I'm guessing that you've encountered new clients in the beginning, in the middle, along the way that just never did inventory. They just never did it. And so a lot of learnings. What are some of those big learnings for folks that started doing it?
Yeah. It's funny. It's funny because the clients who don't do anything end up always being the toughest clients to kind of adopt. And I think the lesson there is simple. Like now it's obvious. At the time, I'm like, I don't get it. They were doing nothing and we gave them this amazing app and it's easy and they're using Wisk. And why is it feel like such an uphill battle? And what we learned is this: nothing is faster than doing nothing. So if you have staff that's doing nothing, right? And now you're like, here's an app and you can scan and we have 200,000 bottles. Even if it takes 40 minutes, it's like before it took 0 minutes. So you're kind of like this uphill battle. So one of the things we started doing is just being a bit more strict with our ICP, our ideal customer profile. And unless someone's really, really adamant and they're, we could tell they want to do the work, generally we try not to be the first one in when they're not doing anything. And when I say anything, it just means that it could be pen and paper. If they're doing something, pen and paper, it could be super inaccurate, it could be Excel, it could be a competitor. Those are usually the easiest because they see the value, but they're having all those pain points. So the day they start using Wisk, they're kind of like, oh, this is so much easier. This was so much smoother. This was so much faster. But if not, it's a bit of an uphill battle.
Yeah.
So truthfully, we try to stay away from kind of like people who don't do it at all. And honestly, if you're not doing it at all, like to me, that's a bit of a red flag because it's one of the most important things.
It is. It's a big one. I was going to ask you along the way, so I guess I'll do it now.
Yeah.
That target customer that you mentioned, or geography. Are you folks all over the country, all over the planet? Small, independent, big, large, anything in between?
Yeah. So generally speaking, our geography wise, we're pretty agnostic in the sense that we do have clients everywhere, but the majority is definitely North America, specifically US, Canada. So that's probably the majority. Just more from a marketing standpoint and an onboarding standpoint, and the 60 POS integrations we work with. So it just happens to be more here, but we do have clients in Europe and certain areas of South America, etc. But definitely the bulk, I would say, is US, Canada. And in terms of the ICP, because we started very strong on like people who have like serious beverage programs, like steakhouses with wine cellars, cocktail bars, we do really well with those places because that's where we started. And then the evolution when we added food, you can imagine we do really well with full service restaurants. So and hospitality groups. So that's definitely our ICP. Like we don't do so well if it's like a mom and pop shop or a food truck because they might not need something as robust as Wisk. We're like, for us, when someone's doing, I don't know, at least 1 million, but typically 2 million plus in annual sales, they have a big wine cellar, they got a big beverage program, they do a lot of food. For them, now they need something that's robust. And for them, the opportunity cost of trying to find a slightly cheaper app or a free app doesn't compensate using Wisk because of all the really in-depth functionality we have to help them. So I would say that's really our core. It's like FSRs and slash bars. And then where we've been kind of veering off to a bit in parallel is QSRs, but specifically the multi-unit. So it's a bit of a newer segment for us, but we had some good success, again, because it kind of goes with that theme of like complexity. If you're a single venue, you might not need it. Maybe it's expensive. But if you have 20, taco shops, we have that robustness to handle the complexity, the reporting. So we've been veering there more. But if I tell you today, our ICP, eyes closed, we do really well with them. It's full service restaurants / bar heavy locations.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, it's one of those things that I'm sure the conversation has changed over time, especially as everyone has become more systematized. But I can imagine 10 years ago when you're saying, hey, we're going to do all this nitty gritty stuff that no one wants to get their hands dirty with. People are like, oh, I don't even want to talk about it. Leave me alone. Like that.
Yeah.
That hopefully is changing because you're leaving money on the table. But you used the word pain points a little while ago, and it's come up. That phrase has come up the last few podcasts that I've done. And I like it because it resonates with folks. You guys obviously deal with a few specific ones.
Yep.
If you were to say what you're hearing from folks, this is really bugging me, that's really bugging me, what are some of the things?
Yeah. So there's a few things. It really depends on the person you're talking to. So if you're speaking to maybe the manager or someone who's or it could be, if it's a single venue, maybe it's the owner itself. But if you're speaking to someone who's more operational, their pain points will be something like, hey, I'm spending 6 hours every Sunday doing my inventory, right? It's long, it's tedious. And even after all that, I'm not even confident in the data. So that's a big one. Another big one is just the visibility, especially on the food side, but both food and beverage. But it's just like, I don't know if I'm making the right margins, right? That's a big one that always comes up because anyone can tell you what they're making, so to speak, revenue-wise, right? And POS do a good job at that, right? Every week, every day, you get your report. So that's easy. Oh, this week I made $10,000. Cool. But then the question is like, how much do you really make from that 10,000? And that's where the cost of goods sold comes in. But it's hard to do because you need to have all your recipes. Your recipes are connected to all these invoices. So that's the second biggest pain point. Even people that are decent with Excel, they'll admit like setting it up is not crazy. Like, oh, I'm opening a new restaurant. Okay, let me create my recipes. Cool. The hard part is maintaining it. When you're ordering from suppliers every week, avocados are changing, meat's changing, this is changing, whatever. It's maintaining the accurate costs of those recipes. That's the hard part. So those are probably two of the biggest ones: is the inventory time, it's the visibility in the margins, and then the third I would say is probably the actual, both on beverage and food, but this one's a bit stronger on the beverage, is their losses. So 1 out of 5 drinks basically. So, well, 20% in a bar generally is gone from overpouring, spillage, or theft. So what that means is,
Mhm.
like, it's kind of a crazy stat when you think of it, but if it was any other industry, you'd be like, that's crazy. Like if you were selling iPads and 1 out of 5 iPads went missing, you'd be like, this is insane. In the beverage world, the reason it was kind of a bit more like okay was because number one, it's hospitality and it's that's the way it is, whatever. But number two, it's hard to track liquid assets. Why? Because you have many different brands, and then for a given tequila or mezcal, you'll have, like I said, many brands within that, and then some open bottles, some closed bottles, and then one single bottle, let's take like a tequila, can be used in many different cocktails. So you don't have this one-to-one you have in retail where it's like, okay, I
Mhm.
have an iPad 128 gigs, I sell it. I got this, I sell it. And then you check your inventory. With Whisk, the big pain point, or sorry, with these bars and restaurants, the big pain point is you have these 200 SKUs, different brands, different categories, and then one single brand could be used in 10 different cocktails, plus a shot, plus a single, plus a double. So it gets really, really hard to reconcile with the sales.
Yeah, I could see that. And we've all gotten a comp drink every once in a while, and
Yeah,
and and
and
and we
that's
all see those
okay.
shots that get poured on the side, and that is part of the business, as you
Yeah,
say. Um, the POS integration, I might want to touch. I'm curious about that,
yeah,
but I want to go first to recipe cost management. We were
sure.
talking about a little bit about this in a webinar we did this week, and again, I mean, it's one of those things you got to do the homework, you've got to do the data, and then you actually have to have folks implement it and do portion control and follow it. And so all those things can
Yes.
fluctuate, but if you're not doing it, it's a big miss. So
Yeah.
do you guys help with every piece of it, to putting it
Yeah.
together, the concoction
Yeah.
of it, the pricing of the different things? So there's a much better understanding when that's in place.
Yeah, 100%, right? Like that's the thing you're selling, right? It's the most important thing. I always tell people it's like, again, going back to that formula of prime cost, you got your labor, which again, you got to get that under control and schedule. And there's different ways, right? It's not just cutting staff, but on the cost of goods sold side, that's the core of it. It's like, what am I selling? And then like
Mhm.
understanding those percentages. But at the end of the day, this is the way we do it. We think of it like this. When you look at a recipe, generally you have two main parts, right? You have the actual sales, and that we automate by just integrating with the POS and pulling it. So if tomorrow you're selling a hamburger at $12, and then the next day someone goes into their POS and changes it to $14, no problem. We're pulling the selling price or the menu price. On the cost side, we have all the ingredients that we put in Whisk, and we like to take it off their plate. So we usually tell them, send us your sheet. If you have a Google Doc, whatever, we'll
Mhm.
enter it in Whisk because they're scanning their invoices, which has the raw ingredients. So then we create their item database, lettuce, tomatoes, whatever it is, with the costs and everything. And then we put together their recipes, and then we show them how to maintain it. So if they want to, they don't have to go through us. If they want to change it, it's super easy. They search, they click, they change a measurement. But the idea is now you have the two main parts of the formula. You have all your recipes, which are automatically updating costs because they're linked to the invoices that are coming in. And then you have the selling price, which is linked to the POS. So the short answer is, once the recipe's in, and again, we do the legwork for them, as long as someone from their staff is scanning the invoices with our mobile app or uploading it on the web or forwarding it via email. So we have a few ways to ingest them. But as long as the invoices are getting into Whisk, all those recipe costs are updating automatically. And on the selling side, it's coming from the POS. So that's kind of how we keep it up to date. And then we like to say they have accurate COGS daily, not just, once a year or seasonally or when they open a new restaurant type of thing.
Yeah, I think you already hit on it, and people are here if they haven't done these sort of changes yet. You're hearing, "Oh my gosh, it could be done kind of automatic. I don't have to go in and change it and sit down."
Exactly.
And so let's kind of go back to that AR piece. Where is the technology is clicking in? What is it doing? I will say this, that people, there's a misunderstanding sometimes about what AI does. And I
Yeah.
was just watching a Bill Gates documentary on Netflix, which the first episode is about AI and the potential dangers of AI and the great pieces of it. So it comes all along the spectrum. How much do you guys integrate it, and where else are you going with it in the future?
Yeah, I mean, like the end goal one day, well, not end goal, but the vision one day is to really get to that kind of. But this is a big vision and a long way. But it's to get to that, Alexa style hey, what am I running out of
Hmm.
this week? Should I reorder something? Like really just getting straight to the question, getting the answers. That's the dream stage, right? But what are we doing today with AI? The main thing is we're using large language models specifically around the invoicing side. So like the old way of kind of maybe scanning invoices was more like OCR, object recognition basically. But now we're actually using real language models trained on like the specific suppliers, and so detecting things like, oh, this thing was scratched out, or there was a discount added, or the I don't know, whatever it may be. So that's been pretty cool because the more, the big suppliers, the training obviously we have more data, so those do really well. But we then add the human element to review, especially on the
Mm.
on the food side, because the food side, and this is what people don't understand sometimes. It's one thing to scan an invoice in your accounting software, right? People are like, oh, I use this thing and I scan my receipts, and that's fine because it's just pulling the text. It doesn't care what it is, whether it was a tomato, a case of this, and that, it doesn't care. It's just a name. It's just text, and there's a dollar amount, and then it has a GL code. But when you're using a system like Whisk, the details matter because you need the units of measurement, because it's updating your inventory, it's updating your recipes. So when you're receiving avocados, it's not just an avocado line item. It's no, okay, wait, was this received by the case? How many's in the case? Oh, it was a case of 48. Okay. What's the cost? Was that the cost per case or per unit? Or if it's meat, cost per kilo, per pound, per whatever. So the idea here is that's why we have that human element to really review, because if that's messed up, that links to your recipe costs, which then will mess up your costing. So the short answer is the main element that we're really leveraging AI right now is specifically around the invoice processing side. But I'm sure that'll evolve, and we want to implement it in other areas as well.
Yeah, you could be like, "Hey, Whisk, what do I need to do today?" And
Yeah.
then and then it answers, and you say, "Do it," and then you go, and then you go play some golf.
Exactly. Or even with the recipes, like it already exists today, like, ChatGPT style stuff where you could be like, take a picture of your fridge and what can I make with this? Like, implementing things like that in the future that are like, okay, based on your overstock, here's some cocktails you
Hmm.
can make. Here's
Hmm.
some, but that's like, I mean, in today's standards, that's very like realistic, like it could be done
Yep.
today.
Yeah.
But yeah, we do see a future where like it's going to be more just like, give me the answers I'm looking for versus like bombarding them with reporting and like
Right.
them trying to figure out where to look.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I mean, people might say, "Well, I hope the thing doesn't order me 700 pounds of potatoes
Mhm.
for for no reason." And of course, so
Yeah,
there is that human involved element
exactly.
to recheck things. What did we not hit that we should as we start to get towards wrap?
Good question. I don't know. Anything. I'm happy to, I'm more open book. Anything you want to ask me, really.
Yeah. Well, I think we hit a lot. So let's go. We're going
Yeah,
to go to rapid fire question mode, where I ask you just a few random things about
love it.
life and business, etc. So I
Cool.
always like to start with advice.
Yeah.
What's a really solid piece of advice you've had?
One that comes to mind is really the idea of, I think that saying was something like show me your calendar and I'll tell you if you'll hit your goals. But the
Hmm.
idea, I'm probably butchering it, but the idea I love, the idea behind that was really managing your time and really like working backwards. So instead of just, I used to be guilty of this. I used to just like always have to-do lists. When I went from a to-do list to really like looking at my calendar and then working backwards and starting with the big rocks and then the pebbles and then the sand, you end up
Yeah.
having a much more fulfilled life. So the idea was simple, but I've been doing it the last 3 years, and it really, really changed my life. So for people listening, the advice is simple. You probably heard the analogy. If you're filling up a cup and you put sand first, and then you try to add a bit of pebbles, and then you try to add a bit of like everything's over, and then water, everything overflows. But if you put the big rocks first, and then the pebbles, and then the sand, it'll go through, and then at the end you could add water. Everything fits perfectly. And the idea is that generally is the big rocks are the most important things in your
Hmm.
life, and the pebbles might be career stuff, and et cetera, et cetera. And when you do that with your calendar, magic happens, because now you're looking at your full year and you're saying, okay, no matter what, I want to go on 2 vacations with my wife this year. Great. That's a rock. I want to go see my family for Christmas. Okay, cool. So you're starting to like put these rocks. And for me, that's been the biggest game changer. So just really kind of working backwards and like preloading that year from
Yeah.
big rocks down to sand.
Yeah, that's a good one. And if folks haven't seen that, I've seen a video. I'm sure there's multiple ones, but there's a video where a professor does it on a desk and he
Yes,
talks to
yes,
the
yes,
kids,
yes,
and it's perfect. I
yes.
don't know, Google that, something rocks, pebbles, professor.
Exactly.
You'll see the video. It's really good. The kids are
Exactly.
like, oh man, so really good stuff. All right, what is a book you're reading now, or a book recommendation you'd share?
Yeah. So the funny thing is, I used to read like, a decent amount of books a year, but then more recently, again, same thing, maybe the last 2 3 years, I kind of got into a habit. I forget where I heard this, and it just gave me the permission because of, instead of going for quantity, just repeating the same book. So
Yeah.
short answers right now, the books that I'm rereading, like literally third, fourth time. One is $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozi. And again, I don't read it from front to back again.
Mhm.
I go to a few chapters and really try to understand certain concepts and apply it, and then go back and read it again. So that one, and then $100 Million Leads, just specifically because it's, I really like reading business books. And the third one that I read, again, I'm not reading front to end. I go to certain chapters and I reread them, is Storytelling with Data, which was a recommendation from one of my podcast guests, and just had a better show data, and that was interesting to me from a Wisk perspective of like how we can help restaurateurs. But those are the three that come to mind. And a piece of advice there, just maybe for people listening, is especially on the business side, don't be shy to just, once you read it once, focus on the few chapters and reread those few chapters 10 times if you have to, because I find those are the most useful when you actually take things out and implement it. If not, you're just reading the same way you might just watch a Netflix show.
Yeah, man,
if you're not applying anything.
I will echo you 100%. I mean, you see a bunch of books back there, but I have found myself going back and rereading. So two things. One, like I tell people when I interview, I read a chapter every day from this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah,
Classic book,
yeah.
a chapter a day. Takes a couple minutes, and especially since I know the material, I skim through it.
Right.
So it's not overwhelming. And so if you tell me, oh, I'm busy, I can't read. Listen, read for 5 minutes a day.
Exactly.
10 minutes a day. Don't get overwhelmed that says you got to do a whole book. So
exactly.
I find myself going through stuff I read some new stuff as well, but reread stuff because especially I'm getting older. My brain, holy cow. I can tell you, I've read this book probably 10 times, but every time I read it, I'm like, it's like
something new.
You need to get refreshed. That's how my brain is anyway.
No, I'm with you there.
So I appreciate that. What's a favorite quote or a saying that you love? What do you think?
Quote wise, I mean, one of my favorite ones, I even have it on in my room, is actually one from the Bible. It's just like, ask and it'll be given to you, seek and you will find, and knock and the door will be open to you. For me, that one always resonates. I love that quote just because it really just speaks to the idea of like, I mean, in a weird way, I think of it in life, but also just in business. Like, don't be scared, get uncomfortable. Sometimes all you have to do is ask, the idea of seeking. So like, discovering things and not being scared to break things and to fail, and then knocking, right? And the door will be open on you. So really like being there at the right time, right opportunity. So for me, I know it's like, might be a little random because it's a quote from the Bible, but I really love that quote for whatever reason. I remember the first time I read it, is like gave me chills. So that's when that comes to mind.
Yeah, listen, it goes back to everyone's grandmother's advice. Don't ask, don't get, right? I mean, that's a big part of life. So speaking of life lessons, business, personal, what do you think? Life lesson?
Yeah, so many. I always joke around like I have so many failures under my belt that I can share a lot of lessons. I mean, one or two that come to mind. Like one honestly is the idea of going back to that calendar, but a little more specific on the idea of buying back your time. That was all, everyone knows it to a certain extent, like, time is your most valuable asset, but not many people maybe take action on it. So one big lesson I learned that I wish I would have done earlier is, only because you can do something doesn't mean you should be doing it. So the idea of like really delegating, offloading. So for me, one of the biggest shifts in my personal life and business life was hiring a personal assistant. But also learning how to properly leverage a personal assistant. Because I've hired one in the past years ago, it didn't work out. I'm like, I'll just do it myself. And then the second time I did it properly and actually read some books and figured out how to do it properly. And that's the biggest game changer, is like, for me, like on a business side, but also a personal side. So the idea of just buying back your time, and a big inspiration for that was Dan Martell's book, Buy Back Your Time. That gave me a lot of good insights on how to do it right. Like I always liked the concept, but I was struggling with like really buying it, finding how to do it. So that's one that definitely comes to mind. And then a bit more on the business side, when launching a new business, I would just say like the biggest lesson I learned with Wisk and even with my previous startups is just focus on the customer. The faster you can get like your product, your idea in the customer hands, doesn't matter how shitty it is, just the better. It's just, and I always joke around, like, it's like, because once you get real sales, like nothing else matters. Or let me rephrase, nothing else is as hard, in the sense of you're trying to raise money. Someone says, "Oh, this idea is stupid." You're like, "Oh, we got 10 people paying $300 a month." Oh, okay. Right. Like you're trying to hire someone, you're trying to hire a developer. They're like, "I don't know, this idea is kind of weird." You're like, "Oh, we got 10 people paying $300 a month." So like a big lesson there for me was like, if you really just focus on the core, which is the customer in the beginning, all those other things that are equally important, hiring people, raising money, whatever it may be, become easier. So just don't delay it. It's human nature to delay it, and you're just waiting for one more feature, one more thing. If you're proud of it when you launched it, you waited too long.
Yeah. Good. Two good pieces there. Actually, a few good pieces along there. What about we touched on it in our talk, AI trends and so forth, but where do you see the restaurant industry kind of as a whole going in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, look, the I think the obvious one is like if you think about that curve of like early adopters and the, early majority and late majority, whatever it is, that kind of bell curve, right? Like it's just gonna go further down. So I think more restaurants, let's say it's tiny percentage of restaurants now adopting some of this tech, and maybe some of the bigger chains doing some of this robotic stuff, like let's say Chipotle or whatever. Like you're seeing that today. So there's going to definitely be more of that. That's for sure. Like more restaurants are going to adopt more of this tech, both like physical robotic stuff, and then maybe online predictive stuff and back of house stuff, kind of like things like Whisk. So I think that'll just be more adopted. In terms of like maybe a call that I think will happen, I don't know if it'll be 3 years, but I've been seeing a trend happen where like, there's kind of this shift where like companies that are trying to get you disconnected from tech are doing well. So whether it's like disconnecting from your phone, or some of these are just consumer apps, but that general trend of like trying to, it's back in terms of like cyclical trends to like, it's cool again to like not have your phone on you. Like even the concept of not bringing your phone with you, or like, hey, I went on a plane and I didn't do anything and I raw dogged that plane by just not doing, like this kind of trends coming back. But I think the thing I would imagine seeing that in certain restaurants. I don't know if it'll be adopted everywhere, but the idea of like restaurants that will do really well will not only have a more personal brand, and maybe founder and chefs will be more of a personality on social and this and that. Like you're already seeing that, but I think there'll be more of that brand connection. But I think in addition, people will restaurants that kind of bring back that human element will do well. So in a weird way, like I know QSRs are growing and this and that, and I know full service restaurants is a tough space, but I do think that these FSRs will make a comeback because people are going to miss the human touch. The waiter that remembers your special drink and that human element. And maybe there'll be elements of like going to cafe and not being able to use your laptop, or there's no internet in the cafe because they don't want you to connect. So I think there'll be more of that trend. That's one thing that comes to mind for sure. But
good.
Generally,
I could see that. As everything goes in one direction, it's like you want a little bit of the other side as well.
Exactly.
To do it. All right. Last question for you.
Sure.
What's one thing that not many folks know about you?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Okay, I mean, I don't know if there's not many people, but I speak pretty fluently Spanish. I only learned like 3-4 years ago. My wife is Colombian, and so when obviously started going to Colombia, I was like, I got to know what they're talking about. So I just learned it. So that was a big one. It helped because I grew up in Montreal, so I spoke English and French, and my parents are Italian, so I spoke some Italian too. But so having that definitely helped with the Spanish. But I think people don't expect it. So like. I was in Colombia with my brothers, and even them just hearing me like communicate with people, order a taxi, do this, they're like, okay, I didn't know you spoke that well. So that's maybe a fun one.
Well, and of course, I think as we touched on before, we didn't talk in the episode, but you're down in Miami, and I lived in Miami for years, and almost the assumption is that you do speak Spanish when you live in Miami. So so it's very helpful.
Helps. Yeah, it definitely helps.
It's very helpful. All right, we didn't talk about the podcast, so talk about your podcast for a second, and then we'll wrap, and you can tell us where to go to find out more stuff and all that.
Oh, yeah. First, thanks so much for having me on. So really, the podcast is called Whisking It All. You maybe see a Whisk sign behind me. You can just go to Wisk.ai, and if you hit on the podcast tab, there's all the links. So like Spotify and YouTube, and it's a video podcast like this too, so you can actually watch the YouTube full videos. We post clips on all our socials, but the idea of the podcast is simple. We get experts on. Sometimes it's actually people that are in the restaurant day-to-day space, so like owners, operators, etc., and just giving their perspective. And sometimes it's just restaurant consultants or other tech companies. It could be a scheduling app, it could be this. So really the idea is simple. We're just trying to help restaurateurs, period. And that concept for me was, I'll never forget when someone told me, like, listen, if the goal of Whisk is to have, just to keep the math simple, let's say 10,000 customers, paying customers, then the question is, how can you help 100,000 people for free? So like, 10% is paying, but the rest you're just helping. So we did a big push there. So we have a podcast. We do a weekly newsletter every Monday on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
We do a weekly newsletter with 25,000 subscribers every Thursday with lessons and things
Nice.
from our podcast. So we're really, over the last year, really started pushing a lot more like we just want to help, period. And then for those of you who are on our ICP and we can actually help and you want to use our software, great. But if you don't, we still want to help. And that's kind of the mission behind Wisk. The main kind of mission, if you zoom out, yes, it's COGS, yes, it's this, but the main mission is really time back, passion forward. These people got in the space to focus on their love of the hospitality space, and they got sucked into doing all this spreadsheet, Excel, boring but necessary stuff.
Yeah.
So our whole philosophy is like, how can we just get their time back and help them, run a profitable business?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Yeah, listen, not everyone's ready to buy every product at the right moment. So be a part of their journey. When they're ready, they may wish to go to you, but be a education force.
Exactly.
Share what's working. I know I appreciate that way. That's our mission as well, to share, and some stuff, eventually filters back our way, and we appreciate it. All right. Folks, Angelo Esposito, CEO there of Wisk.ai. You can find them at, I believe it's just wisk.ai, correct?
Correct. Yeah,
wisk.ai. Easy to find. Lots of good stuff. You can click over to the podcast from there as well. So I saw case studies on there, and I'm sure, like you pointed to, the newsletter. So lots of good content there. For more great restaurant marketing, operations, service people, and tech news, stay tuned to us here at runningrestaurants.com. In the meantime, do me a favor, wherever you're listening or watching, hit a like button, a subscribe, do a quick review or rate. That stuff is helpful. We certainly appreciate it. Thank you, Angelo.
Thank you. Appreciate you.